It's an absolute honor to be talking to Mark Tully. A very warm welcome to you, Mark. Mark, there has been this long time in history that we've been watching, and I say history specifically because it has been that long, and there has been this abiding love for India. Tell us about the genesis of it, and tell us about what has really driven this abiding love.
Well, you know, I don't really like using the word love for India in a way, because then that love is blind, and I can see a lot of faults in India, but I have a great affection for India.
Yes.
And I would be a very ungenerous person if I did not have it, because India has been wonderfully kind and generous to me. But it all happened really accidentally in a way, because a job went up in the BBC saying in India, and I thought to myself, well, I've been born in India, my mother was born in India, my mother's family goes back 4 generations in India, so perhaps I should come here. And when I came here, I'd been quite unsettled in England. I hadn't really really settled down to anything.
Well, you came very close to being a priest, didn't you?
Yeah, but then that very unsettling when I stopped doing it. You see, that was the problem.
Then suddenly you didn't know what you wanted to do.
No. And I didn't really know where I wanted to live. I wanted to belong somewhere.
Right.
And somehow when I came to India, as soon as I came here, all my childhood rushed through my head. And I felt there must be something special about India. And then, as I stayed here for 4 years before I went back to England for a brief time, I felt very much at home here and everything. And my wife said when we got back to England, she said, I think India is where your future lies. So then I got a job in the BBC to do with India. And then by good luck, I was able to come back again because my successor got into some trouble, which wasn't entirely his fault.
Right.
And they said someone who knows India had better go back, so I went back. And then the emergency came, and I did it the other way around. I said, if you don't send me back after we'd been expelled during the emergency, if you don't send me back, it'll look as though I did something wrong.
Yes.
So the BBC swallowed that one, and then they gave up on getting rid of me, and I gave up on leaving India.
So it all turned out well, didn't it?
Well, it did, and you see, I do have this belief, people always ask me about this, but I do have this belief in karma, in fate. I once wrote in a book that our life is 90% fate and 10% free will, and it seems to me, looking back on it, that it's been my fate to come back to India, which has been the land of my mother's family for such a long time anyhow.
And yet, Mark, you have covered those most trying times that India has seen, the most troubling moments, and that's the time that, you know, for every reporter, I would imagine, it's their moment of glory. For better or worse, that is their moment of glory.
Yeah.
So you've seen it all.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tell us about the most trying times when you have been covering India and all that has been happening in it, which stood out as the most challenging.
Well, you know, one of the challenges we had, which people wouldn't appreciate nowadays, was that we were effectively local broadcasters. We were broadcasting to India, very much so, because there was only the government news channels on radio and television other than us. And so lots of people turned to the BBC as an alternative channel. So our biggest channel, really, was maintaining our credibility with this audience and making sure that our stories were absolutely as accurate as we could do, as unbiased as we could do. And of course, no one can be absolutely accurate, no one can be absolutely unbiased. In fact, there are always questions. One person will say this is biased, another person will say it's not biased.
But that's the course of journalism.
Yeah, but it's much harder when you are doing day-to-day broadcasting to an enormous audience, like millions and millions of Indians, because you have it in your feeling, you know, that you don't want to get a letter from any remote village saying, why did you say this, or why did you say that, or you got this wrong, or something like that.
Is that always the big challenge, Mark? And I've always wondered about this for foreign journalists who are stationed in places other than their places of origin, to cover that place. Where does the real allegiance lie? Is it to the people they're reporting about, or the people they're reporting to? Which is really, in your case, in the BBC's case, the world.
Well, I think it lies to both, actually, and I think it's very important, the question about loyalty to the people you're reporting. I always say that we should new say, this is my story, as we so often do. It's actually the
More
story.
More often now than before.
Yeah. Well, I always tried to think to myself, no, this is not my story. This is the story of the person or the people who are suffering terribly from a flood or something like that, whatever it is, you know, or the politician who's in trouble or whatever else it may be. And so we do owe a loyalty to them, and we owe a loyalty, especially in an organization like the BBC, which people turn to because they believe it to be reliable, to our audience to be totally reliable and faithful to them as well.
No, but my question is, does it work at cross purposes sometimes when you're trying to serve a world audience and an audience who you're reporting about?
I don't think it should work at cross purposes.
But it must have. In your career, I'm sure it must have. And you must have been at loggerheads trying to figure out what the right thing to do is.
There was a real, I'll give you an example of a real problem which we did have. And that was in Pakistan during the anti-Bhutto movement. Because in Pakistan, like India, it was only the government media. And the government media were totally pro-Bhutto. And we were giving out details of government meetings. And we were saying that the PNP, the PNA, the Pakistan National Alliance, opposed to Bhutto, they're having a meeting tomorrow, you know. Now, we debated this endlessly because, of course, the government said, you're just acting as the voice of the PNA and recruiting agent for them. We debated it urgently and in depth. I don't know whether we took the right decision, even to this day. And certainly we were taken by the PNA as their voice. Right. And that's a seriously worrying thing when that happens. And I'm not at all sure whether we did get the balance right all the time then. I'll tell you a very quick funny story about this.
Sure.
What always happens actually with the BBC is if there is a real anti-government movement, we do tend to be taken as the voice of the opposition. And when Bhutto was in power, we were taken as the voice of the PNA and hated by the Bhuttoites. But then when Bhutto got into trouble, we were taken as the voice of Bhutto. And I remember the 40 days after Bhutto was hanged,
yes.
And I was covering the ceremony, and I literally had to fight people off because they wanted to put me on their shoulders like a hero and say, Mark Tully Zindabad, BBC Zindabad, which would of course been disastrous for my credibility.
Absolutely.
But this is a problem we face, a real problem.
Yes, and these are, trying moments, and you must have had plenty of those, considering that you had such a long stint with a global network like the BBC.
Yes.
But then the parting of ways wasn't easy either.
Well, the parting of ways came about really because I have a great, I loved my time with the BBC. I was never ever thought of leaving. But I thought that the new Director General who came in was being very rude about the BBC, which he'd taken over, suggesting that it was, it had gone rotten almost in a way, and suggesting also all sorts of reforms which were largely driven by management consultants who hadn't basically consulted the staff or the people who knew how to do their job at all. So I made a speech against the Director General and against what was happening, and I remember a phrase I used. I said, we don't want revolution in the BBC, we want to evolution. And I stressed the importance of what I saw as ethos. And as a result of this, I was told by the BBC that I had to shut up and never speak about the BBC again.
That couldn't have gone down well with an organization with a long history of bureaucracy and a certain style of functioning. But post that, Mark, I'm sure it has been another, life's destiny, like you called it.
Yes.
Because you've enriched your life in every possible way. You've understood this nation, you've traveled around, and even now you've been busy writing, you're involved with social work. I understand you were at Oroville recently because you're part of the think tank there.
Yes. Well, no, but funnily enough, it's been very much fate. One of the things I did when I left the BBC, I said to myself, I am not going to tie myself to any organization, and I'm not going to write a regular column or anything like that, because I don't want to be tied to anything any longer. And one of the things, a little thing which I said to myself was that I'm going to keep myself sufficiently free that every evening, if I feel like it, I can have a bath, put on kurta pajamas, open a bottle of beer, have some friends around maybe to share the beer with me, and completely relax in the knowledge that no one can ring me up and say there's been a riot here or a flood there or something like that, get on the air. So one of the things I've tried to do is to keep myself as free and as open as possible.
And you've been able to do that quite consistently,
to some extent, yes.
And what's the next work we can expect out of you, Mark?
Well, I'm trying to write short stories, which is very difficult because I don't know whether they're any good or not.
There's only one way to find out, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I am boring one or two people and telling them, please read me and see if you think these are any good or not. You know?
Right. And what are they telling you?
Well, the only person I've tried so far is my partner, Gillian. She's been quite tough on him.
Oh, that's right.
So there have been changes, certainly.
That's right. But you do a lot of reading as well, and this is on your train journeys, which I understand you do a lot of.
I love trains. I'm a train maniac, and anyone who loves trains hates motor cars and aeroplanes because they're what's put trains out of business. And I think the best way to travel is by rail. I love doing it still. I've got quite good, close connections with Indian Railways. My father had a railway background in that he was a director of the Darjeeling Himalayan Railway.
Yes.
And I love railways and I hate aeroplanes, particularly.
Absolutely. But tell us what you're reading right now. Are there any new, young, fresh writing Indian writers that interest you, have caught your attention, and you say, yes, this is capturing a contemporary India?
Well, I'm reading an absolutely fascinating book at the moment, and the author is here at this festival, and it's called The Righteous Republic. And it's absolutely fascinating because, I wrote a book called No Full Stops in India, in which the appeal was that India must evolve a way of going ahead which is Indian and in tune with India's culture. And I was criticized by Karan Thapar very nicely. I mean, Karan's a good friend of mine. I've known him since his university days, but he criticized me on his program. So I said to him, Karan, do you want a nakli America or an asli Bharat? And, a fake America or pale imitation of America or a true India. And that's what I've been searching for ever since. And this book, The Righteous Republic, is a very scholarly, deep book in which the author analyzes the Indian-ness of the independence movement, and how it was that all the leaders of the independence movement were fundamentally appealing to something which is really about what she calls the Indian self. And I think that's an absolutely fascinating book, and I think it's a search which should be going on today, because I don't think in the politics of today that either the two major parties are related to the Indian self in the truest sense.
That's right. But even in that sense, your search for the Asli Bharat continues, doesn't it? In all that you're doing right now, it seems like you are still looking for what is truly India, as many of us are. And we hope you luck in this journey, Mark, and we expect to read much more of you in the future. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.